Hello everyone, this is R.S. Miller at the endtimenews.org and today is May 2nd, 2014. This is a special report. Are you ready for a nuclear war with Russia? As the crisis in Ukraine continues to escalate, so does the very real possibility of a thermonuclear war with Russia. On Thursday, the Ukraine military went on full alert in anticipation of a Russian invasion. The government in Kiev has placed its military on full alert due to what's being perceived as a legitimate threat of a Russian invasion into eastern Ukraine. It's being reported by various news agencies that Ukraine's interim president, Alexander Turchinov, said that the Ukraine armed forces have been put on full alert because of the real threat that Russia would unleash a conventional war against Ukraine. Turchinov also stated in essence that the situation in eastern Ukraine was out of control. He said that Kiev cannot control the situation in the east of the country. This latest escalation in the crisis comes as pro-Russian activists seize another government building in eastern Ukraine. Today, the Ukrainian military began an operation against pro-Russian activists in Slavyansk. Ukraine troops are said to be surrounding the city and setting up blockades. The assault by Kiev is reported to have included tanks, armored vehicles, and up to 20 helicopter gunships, of which 2 were shot down by rebels using high-tech shoulder-fire anti-aircraft missiles. At last count, 2 Ukrainian soldiers are reported to have been killed, along with 1 activist, while reports state that one of the helicopter pilots was injured and taken to the hospital. It is being expected by pro-Russian rebels in Slavyansk that the most active phase of Ukraine's military operation will take place in the late hours of May 2nd, a spokesperson said. He went on to say, "All our forces are now concentrated on Slavyansk." Other reports stated that self-defense forces from Crimea have been making their way to Slavyansk to assist the local militia in their efforts to defend the city. While the Ukraine military conducts its operations in Slavyansk, reports are also coming in that militant groups have seized a control center for the Donetsk railroads. According to a railroad official, pro-Russian protesters practically stopped all train movements. Russia has warned Ukraine not to launch attacks on what it calls Ukrainian civilians, while Kiev believes that the pro-Russian separatists are intermingled with Russian troops. Meanwhile, NATO allied countries continue the buildup of troops and equipment in preparation for what may best be described as a looming military confrontation with Russia. On Tuesday, April 29th, 6 Canadian CF-18 jet fighters left their airbase in Canada headed for Romania as part of NATO's efforts to reassure its partners in the region and to be prepared should war break out with Russia. In addition, the Canadian government is sending one of its warships, the HMCS Regina, to the Black Sea over the Ukraine crisis. It will become part of the NATO Security Task Force already in the region. Canadian Prime Minister Stephen Harper said that our government and our country remain steadfast in our support for the people of Ukraine in the face of ongoing militarism and aggression by the Putin regime. On April 29th, Lieutenant General Mark Skisler, Deputy Chairman of the NATO Military Committee at the joint press conference with the Latvian Chief of Defense, stated that the ongoing crisis in Ukraine has reinforced solidarity among allies and shown our solid commitment to maintain peace and security in the Euro-Atlantic area is stronger than ever. Article 5 is not negotiable. An attack against Latvia or any other allied country will be considered an attack against all. Soldiers, ships, and aircraft from many NATO nations are currently deployed in the region to show that NATO is not only talking, but taking concrete action. Again on the 29th, U.S. Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel has stepped up his consultations with Eastern European NATO allies in light of Russian activities along its border with Ukraine, according to Pentagon Press Secretary Navy Rear Admiral John Kirby. Hagel met at the Pentagon that day with Estonian Defense Minister Seven Mikser, and later was scheduled to meet with Czech Defense Minister Martin Stropnicki. Kirby said that the United States has sent jets to Poland and to the Baltic air policing effort. It has also sent company-sized units to Poland, Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia to exercise with those nations in what defense officials have called a direct response to Russia's intervention in neighboring Ukraine. Kirby said that the U.S. military would provide a robust rotational presence in the region through the end of 2014. Also, Kirby shed more light on Hagel's phone call with Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu the other day. The 45-minute conversation was described as substantive, and the Russian leader said twice that Russian forces would not cross the border into Ukraine. Kirby went on to say, Hagel was very clear with the Russian defense minister that the United States wants a better understanding of Russian intentions and Russian force levels along the border. The force levels as they are not doing anything to reduce tensions in Ukraine. In fact, quite the opposite, because they have been there for so long and in such great numbers that it's simply making things more tense, Kirby said. Our expectation is that their actions are going to meet their words and their promises, he added. To date, there has been no indication that large numbers of Russian troops have stepped away from the border. The admiral also addressed irregular elements inside Ukraine fomenting violence. That's one of the issues that Secretary Hagel has raised with Minister Shoigu yesterday, he said. It's an influence we'd like to see stopped. These forces are clearly military-trained personnel, the admiral said, but Russian leaders say they are not. I think it's safe to say that Minister Shoigu held a different view about who those individuals are and who they are working for. But look, I grew up in Florida. If it looks like an alligator, it's an alligator, Kirby said. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry also made some remarks at the Atlantic Council's Toward a Europe Whole and Free conference, which suggests the seriousness of the Ukraine crisis.
The events in Ukraine are a wake-up call. Our European allies have spent more than 20 years with us, working to integrate Russia into the Euro-Atlantic community. It is not as if we really haven't bent over backwards to try to set a new course in the post-Cold War era. And so we've pursued serious bilateral engagement. We invited Russians to join organizations like the WTO, the NATO-Russia Council. But what Russia's actions in Ukraine tell us is that today Putin's Russia is playing by a different set of rules. And through its occupation of Crimea and its subsequent destabilization of eastern Ukraine, Russia seeks to change the security landscape of Eastern and Central Europe. So we find ourselves in a defining moment for our transatlantic alliance, and nobody should mistake that. And we are prepared to do what we need to do and to go the distance to uphold that alliance. Our strength will come from our unity. They claim eastern Ukraine is too violent for monitors from the OSCE to be there, but when it comes to the armed pro-Russian separatists, the ones who are actually perpetrating the violence, they do absolutely nothing to prevent them from taking those prisoners and hostages they've taken or to free them. And they allow them to be paraded in front of the press, and we see no evidence at all that Russia has actually pressured any of these groups in order to release any of these people or change course. Now, I say this with a certain element of sorrow because of all of the effort and energy that has been expended to try to create a structure by which we would behave, all of us, differently, representing the best hopes and aspirations of all people on the face of this planet. That's what all of our predecessors worked so hard to achieve, setting up a structure of rule of law, of international law, and multilateral mechanisms by which we try to resolve these kinds of differences. The Russians have a clear choice. Leave Ukraine in peace and work with us together to create a strong Ukraine. A Ukraine that is not the pawn pulled and tugged at between East and West, but a Ukraine that could be a bridge to both, with the ability to have an open trading mechanism on all degrees, 360 around Ukraine. And whatever path they choose, I can guarantee this: the United States and our allies will stand together in support of Ukraine. This crisis is a wake-up call for us to accelerate the other work that we've been doing to promote a stronger, more prosperous transatlantic community. It serves us well to remember the words of President Eisenhower, who said about NATO, when he was talking to our NATO allies, he said, we can take satisfaction from the past, but no complacency in the present. The crisis in Ukraine now calls us back to the role that this alliance was originally created to perform, and that is to defend alliance territory and advance transatlantic security. So together, we have to push back against those who want to try to change sovereign borders by force. Together, we have to support those who simply want to try to live as we do. Together, we have to continue our strong support for Ukraine. And we can do that through economic assistance, and we can do it through support for free and fair elections, for constitutional reform, for anti-corruption, and for demobilization efforts. Most important, together, we have to make it absolutely clear to the Kremlin that NATO territory is inviolable. We will defend every single piece of it. Article 5 of the NATO treaty must mean something, and our allies on the front lines need and deserve no less.
Friends, there should be little or no doubt that a thermonuclear war with Russia is headed our way. This war is scheduled to take place in the not-too-distant future, that is, if in fact it hasn't already begun. Many scholars and political figures thought that after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the collapse of the powerful Soviet Union, that there would be no need for the massive size of the U.S. military and its nuclear arsenal. Some even advocated not only for the reduction of U.S. nuclear weapons, but also their total elimination as well. Now that the era of cooperation between Moscow and the West appears to be at its end, and the Russian bear is awakening out of its slumber, the human race stands on the precipice of a global nuclear war. Considering the fact conventional military forces have been significantly reduced by the West since the fall of the Berlin Wall, a military confrontation between NATO and its allies against the Russian Federation would quickly escalate to the use of nuclear weapons. It is more than likely that should NATO and the West find themselves wholly inadequate to suppress a Russian offensive on the battlefield, one which threatens to overrun Allied forces, then the use of so-called tactical nukes is certainly well within the equation. As a matter of fact, the use of tactical nukes has been a part of the U.S. plan to defend Europe since the Cold War era. And if the former Soviet Union, with its massive armored tank divisions, had decided to go to war and cross into Europe, the U.S. and European allies would have been overwhelmed by a lightning-fast strike of Russian tanks. It was acknowledged by the Pentagon that Allied forces would not have been able to stop their advance without the use of nukes. Therefore, nukes became an integral part of the U.S. plan for the defense of Europe. And of course, if the West uses nuclear weapons against Russian troops, they will most certainly use theirs against Allied troops. Also, if Russia finds itself on the verge of collapse due to economic sanctions imposed by the West, and already feeling surrounded by NATO allied countries, some of which used to be part of the former Soviet Union, then it is very likely that Moscow would view the situation as an existential threat and launch a nuclear first strike on the US and Europe. If you think this scenario is too far-fetched to be a real possibility, and that Russia would not launch a nuclear war over the Ukraine crisis, then just remember this. Several weeks ago, Russia issued a powerfully strong warning to the U.S. administration. This warning came via a journalist who had the support and approval of the Kremlin. The journalist said, "Russia is the only country in the world that is capable of turning the United States into radioactive ash." This is one of the strongest threats towards the West to come out of Russia since the summer of 2012, when we nearly went to World War III over Iran's nuclear ambitions and the Syrian civil war. And let us not forget that this Middle East crisis is not over yet. Israel is becoming increasingly concerned over Iran's pursuit of a nuclear bomb and the West's apparent lack of resolve in dealing with the crisis. Once Israel is absolutely convinced that Iran is going to achieve their goal without direct military intervention, then they will most definitely give the IDF the order to strike. Depending on the circumstances surrounding the Israeli strike on Iran, whether or not there is a U.S./Western involvement, the Israelis may decide to use nuclear weapons in order to permanently destroy the Iranian nuclear facilities. And if in fact Israel does use nukes against Iran, it would certainly act as a catalyst for the Gog-Magog war of Ezekiel 38 and 39. And could well be the reason that all nations on the earth are gathered against Jerusalem in the last days, as it states in the book of Zechariah. In chapter 12, the Bible states that the burden of the word of the Lord against Israel. Thus says the Lord, who stretches out the heavens, lays the foundation of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all the surrounding peoples, when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away will surely be cut into pieces, though all nations of the earth are gathered against it. And in Ezekiel chapter 38, speaking of the Gog-Magog war, verse 3 states, "And say," that's the Lord speaking, "Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, the prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal. I will turn you around, put hooks into your jaws, and lead you out, with all of your army, horses, and horsemen, all splendidly clothed, a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Persia, which is Iran, Ethiopia, and Libya are with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all of its troops, the house of Togarmah from the far north, and all of its troops. Many peoples are with you. Prepare yourself and be ready, you and all your companies that are gathered about you, and be a guard for them. After many days you will be visited. In the latter years you will come into the land of those brought back from the sword, and gathered from many people on the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They were brought out of the nations, and now all of them dwell safely. Continuing on in chapter 39, And you, son of man, prophesy against Gog, and say, Thus says the Lord God, Behold, I am against you, O Gog, the chief prince of Rosh, Meshech, and Tubal, and I will turn you around and lead you on, bringing you up from the far north, and bring you against the mountains of Israel. Then I will knock the bow out of your left hand, and cause the arrows to fall out of your right hand. You shall fall upon the mountains of Israel, you and all your troops, and the peoples who are with you. I will give you to birds of prey of every sort, and to the beasts of the field to be devoured. Now what we are seeing in Ukraine is an increased in tensions and mistrust between Russia, who is the Gog of the Bible, and the U.S. and allies. These escalating hostile attitudes will not be confined only to Europe over the current crisis, but they will also spread to every other area in which differences between the opposing sides exist. It is my opinion that based on Bible prophecy and world events, the global nuclear war which I spoke of earlier could well take place within the next several years, if not sooner. Keep your eyes open and keep watching, because we are living in the last days, and although no one knows the day or the hour, we will know when it is near, even at the doors. Are you saved? Follow the link in the box below and pray the prayer of salvation with a sincere heart, and you will be saved. May God bless you and yours.